I'm Michael Mansfield, as Pierre just said, and I just want to not assume that you all know what we're about. I know a number of you do, but some don't. And I think it's very important that we put in context what we've been doing and why we've been doing it. I'm speaking slowly because there are more people pouring through the door, so I hope I can have 8 minutes instead of 7. All right. There's plenty of seats, so it should be all right. So first point about the context before we get to the substance. The context is that we sit representing citizens of the world, in the sense that it sounds a very sort of glib phrase, but representing the conscience of citizens of the world for what is going on in the Middle East, in particular on this occasion, what is going on in Gaza. Now, the Russell Tribunal on Palestine is not a new animal. It's existed before. You will recall, perhaps, that its best-known work was done in relation to Vietnam and American war crimes on that occasion. And the founder, essentially, whose spirit lives on, is Bertrand Russell. And he wanted to ensure that the crime of silence is overcome. But it's more than that now. And the trigger for this series on Palestine was a very important judgment, and as a lawyer I'm concerned with the rule of law. Of course I have views, we all have views, but bottom line, the law, the rule of law matters to me more than anything else. Now in 2004, the International Court of Justice, sometimes called the World Court in The Hague, came out with a ruling which I normally carry around with me like a Bible. I haven't got it here today, but I know it, not off by heart, but pretty well. Now, for those of you who don't know the judgment, it's called The Wall. It's worth looking it up, Googling it, whatever you want to do to get it. It's readily available. This was an extremely important judgment in which the jurists of the world, 14 jurists, only one dissented, overwhelmingly decided that the wall, never mind everything else that's been going on since 1967, but the wall, whether you call it an apartheid wall or any other kind of wall, the wall itself was unlawful. The United Nations had asked this court, because it's a subsidiary of the United Nations, to pass judgment about it. And it was very, very clear. It was not necessary for self-defense. It was totally disproportionate, and it denied the right to self-determination. Now, you can't get it clearer than that. Did that make any difference? Not at all, so far as Israel is concerned, so far as America is concerned, so far as the United Kingdom is concerned, because they're all accessories, and they're all colluding with silence. Actually worse, obstruction. Because the court went on to say that we all have an obligation under international law to make sure, to ensure that the strictures of the law are carried out. And that was the impetus, because we thought, well, if no one else is going to do anything about it, we better. Two things: identify what's gone wrong, where the violations occur, and what can be done about it. And over 4 years, we've had 4 sessions, well actually 5, the last one was here in Brussels, and we've produced a number of reports like this, which are available. I mention them each time because people say, what can we do, where can we find the facts? They're in these reports, set out very clearly already. So we've been over this ground, and we don't want to be sitting here again, going over it yet again. But we are, and we're very pleased to see numbers that turned out yesterday, capacity. We've had capacity at all the venues we've been at, the 4 different venues, both in Europe and in New York. So, do read the previous reports, but what you're asking is, so why have you come back? Well, we've come back because there is an emergency. An emergency that requires urgent action and reaction from all of us together to bring pressure to bear for change. And what is the emergency? Well, the report that we've done on this occasion is available. It looks like this. You should all have copies. Is there anybody who hasn't had access to a copy? Could we get... Right, I'm going to pause because there's no point in this. We're not going to read it out. We're not going to read it out word for word because it'll take the rest of the day. It took most of the night, although I have to say only a bit of my night. But yeah, they're here, please. Thanks.
Tu l'as déjà. Tu l'as. Miguel, Miguel, tu l'as déjà. Miguel, on n'a qu'à le donner à quelqu'un d'autre. Miguel, tu l'as déjà. C'est celui qu'on t'a donné tout à l'heure.
Je croyais que c'était la traduction en français. En anglais.
Right.
C'est en anglais, oui.
Sorry, I paused for a minute.
On n'a pas eu le temps de travailler. Nous avons travaillé jusqu'à 3 heures.
Is there anybody else still lacking the document itself? Right. Somebody else still arriving. Now, just some words of amplification about the report itself. It's not going to be the final version, because as you may imagine, being done during the night after a heavy day in the tribunal, there are bound to be typing errors. I haven't checked it for that, but there may be, somebody's waiting, there may be other amendments and amplifications that we want to add, but the thrust of our findings is there, so there won't be any detraction from that. Secondly, we do set out examples, and members of the jury who sit either side of me will, when they speak about aspects of the report, possibly refer to some of the testimonies that we heard throughout the whole of yesterday. So, but you can find those testimonies. I believe you will be able to find them. I'm speaking slowly in case Frank Barrett, who organises everything on this front, says to me, well, not today, but tomorrow. But the testimonies are going to be either online or on YouTube, so that you'll be able to actually see what people said and hear what they said, obviously, at the same time. So it's not as though we dreamt this out of the blue or it's some kind of polemic. It's not. It's firmly rooted in the rule of law and the rules of law, and we've tried to set them out in here, and it's firmly rooted in evidence from people who've either been in Gaza, and of course it's extremely difficult for people to get in and out, and others in the testimony that have been in the public domain in any event. So what's the urgency and emergency on this occasion? Well, I'm going to put it very shortly before we amplify this, and that is that there is, in the context of all of this, a real need to amplify and ensure that the voice of Gaza is heard. Because the media, generally, and some of you are here today, thank you very much, performing perhaps and supplementing the role of the normal media, where it's very, very difficult to hear the stories and the voices from Gaza. They don't get the airtime that they deserve. And we were all shocked by some of the testimony because we'd not heard it before. So a big question does arise as to the role of the media generally and why these stories have not been told properly. So that's one thing, the voice of the Gazan people, the citizens who are themselves being targeted. That's the first thing. Second thing is, there has been an intensification beyond measure. And I may not need to explain it in detail because you'll have seen it, some of it, but only a small proportion in some newspapers and on some television channels like Channel 4 in the United Kingdom. However, if you want a very encapsulated form of the extent of the systematic destruction of people and property and culture, it's in a paragraph on the second page at the top, paragraph 2. You don't have to read it now, but that's the paragraph that has it all. If somebody says, what's this all about? Well, there it all is, spelt out, the extent of it. And it's horrifying. It's always horrifying to see one person, one child, one woman destroyed. But this is on a scale that's unimaginable and goes back to certain scenes that derive from the Second World War. So, unimaginable destruction in an encircled, imprisoned space, because they are incarcerated in this area where they are being shelled out of existence. So that's the real difference. It's happened during this operation, euphemistically called Protective Edge. One wonders exactly who it's protecting. So Protective Edge was the name of the operation, which took place over 51 days. That's the first reason that we felt we had to reconvene, because no one else was doing anything about it. The recommendations that we put forward before for the implementation of international law has, as usual, not gone unheeded. Oh yeah, they certainly are listening now, but they're not implementing. They're not implementing because they are afraid. And we want to, as it were, put the backbone back into the people who should be responding to them. So there's been impunity, yet again, for the Israelis to do precisely what they want to do, turn their backs on the law. And I spent my life trying to turn people's back around so they face the law. That's the first difference on this particular occasion. It's on a scale like no other. Now the second reason why it's different, the second reason is there is a narrative here. There is a narrative that underlies what's been going on this summer in Gaza. And the narrative is a genocidal narrative. And we've spelt it out at the end from paragraph 18 onwards. Now, I'm not going to read it all out. All I want to do is to highlight the fact that we as a jury recognize the context in which the crimes that we specify earlier, and we include incitement to genocide. And we heard witnesses yesterday, again, spelling out the kind of thing, the kind of rhetoric that is being used. And we are worried. More than worried, we are so concerned that we are inches away from something that will become genocide on a scale we haven't seen for some years. Unless the international community do something about it, are alerted and take action. And that's why we're here today. It's not just the acts themselves, it's the, if you like, the rhetoric and the philosophy that stands behind it, that's been there in a sense since the beginning of the foundation of the State of Israel, and we include a little passage about that as well. So we do need people to pick up on this before it's too late. We don't want to be saying, no one told us. Well, we're telling you right here what the story is that underlines all of this. And therefore we want the message to go back to institutions and governments, and this afternoon we're going to the European Parliament. Now we're not just, as it were, a talking shop, and I'll just deal with it briefly. At the very end of the report which you've got, which is section 5, paragraph 30 onwards, we've always been anxious to indicate what people can do, how you can be empowered to take action, rather than, because people want to know, well, can we make a difference? The answer is yes, you can. And there are lots of ways in which you can do it. Perfectly lawful ways in which you can challenge what is happening, and therefore the consequences and action section for those who want to leave the building today with a sense of purpose, it's all there. Sorry, I've taken a bit longer to explain our purpose here today, and if I may, therefore, having made that introduction, we're going to allow, obviously, time for questions, but I think other members of the jury have points they wish to amplify out of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.